Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks again for joining us today for this episode of Orange Plate Special. I'm Mark Blakeman. I'm the Marilyn and Carl Thoma Executive Director of the McKnight Center for the Performing Arts at Oklahoma State University. I'm coming to you live from the stage of our recital hall here at the McKnight Center, and we have two very special guests with us today from the San Francisco-based vocal ensemble Chanticleer, Tim Keeler and Adam Ward. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate that. Adam, you're on the West Coast, and Tim, you're on the East Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't actually started yet. I'm moving out to California in a couple weeks to join Adam.
Fantastic. So, actually, I think that is a good segue. I have some notes about your respective roles in the ensemble, but I think it would be more interesting for each of you to tell everyone what it is that you do with Chanticleer. And so maybe, Tim, you'd do that for us. Tell us about your new role, and you've got a little bit more history with the group than just that. So would you lead us off, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will be starting a new role with Chanticleer as their music director at the beginning of August. And it's really exciting for me. It's sort of been a dream of mine ever since I can remember being into choral music, which was, ever since I can remember. And so a music director of Chanticleer is a little different from maybe the conductor of a normal choir or a conductor of an orchestra or something, because Chanticleer performs without a conductor. They perform, it's just the 12 guys, and usually in a semicircle on stage without anybody in front of them, which is great. It really adds to like the drama of a performance, and it means that the conductor doesn't have to get in the way. So as music director, you notice it's not conductor, it's music director. So my job is to choose repertoire, to rehearse the ensemble, to travel with the ensemble where appropriate, when appropriate, to different venues to maintain the repertoire, maintain a good level of musicianship and musicality throughout the year. But I actually don't perform on stage with the ensemble. I'm sort of behind the scenes, taking notes and helping things move along outside of the actual performance, which I think is actually a pretty unique role in the professional music world. But I will say I did have a chance to perform with Chanticleer 2 seasons ago, or was it 3 now? I sang with the group. I'm a countertenor by trade, and that was my first introduction to the group actually in person, was singing with them. And so Adam and I stood next to each other on stage for a whole season and got to make music together. So no other alto I'd rather sing with than Adam Ward right there. And but now the singing part is behind me, and I'm putting to use my degree in choral conducting, which I'm finishing up at the moment, to be the music director.
Very nice. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Adam, you've got a rich history with this ensemble. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and what that looks like?
Sure. I joined Chanticleer in 2006, so I'll be starting my 15th year with the group. I actually, singing was just sort of a hobby of mine that I was doing. I was studying music. I was getting a doctoral degree as a French horn player. That was my main thing. Actually, I have my horn right there beside me. I still play. And I was starting to get a lot of gigs in New York City, singing in churches or singing what, people would hire me to do their own new music and so forth. And so I was encouraged by a few people to audition for Chanticleer. Actually, Chanticleer came to me a few times because they had heard about what I was doing in New York City. And I actually turned it down the first time when they offered me a job. And then the next year they asked me again. So I thought, hey, I realized it was one of the best jobs in music that there is to have, and of course over these last 14 years, I mean, I've toured the world. I've seen every state in the country, and I've even gotten to perform in my home state of Oklahoma, and
Very nice.
it's been something that is truly a blessing in my life and in my career to be in Chanticleer.
So, if we have some viewers who maybe are less familiar with Chanticleer, could one of you just tell us a little bit briefly about the history of the ensemble? I know it goes back many decades at this point, and how it came about.
Yeah, Adam, just jump in whenever you
Okay.
feel appropriate. The group just finished its 42nd season. So it started in 1978 by a man named Louis Botto. And this was sort of at the beginning of the early music revival, at least in America. And he was a student of early music in the Bay Area and wanted to start a group that would perform Renaissance polyphony the way that it had been performed originally. And what that means is essentially without women's voices, which, that's sort of an unfortunate fact of choral music, is that for hundreds of years, most of the music was performed in the church and women weren't allowed to participate in the services. So the music was sung by choirs of men and boys. And Louis Botto decided that he wanted to start a group to explore this repertoire with all male voices. That's how it began back in 1978, sort of as a really just an early music sort of specialist group.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think it had 12 members back then. It was fewer than that, but it grew to 12 members over the years. So the current version of the group is we sing soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, all the highs and lows, all with male voices. So that means we have half the group that sings in a falsetto register, which is what Adam and I do actually, which is taking the parts that would normally in a modern day choir be sung by women, but in the Renaissance would have been sung by men or boys. So that was sort of where it got its genesis, and it's evolved over the years. Now the group performs early music, of course, but any other style you could possibly imagine. And that's I think one of the great things about the ensemble is the way it's evolved over the years and taken on the mantle of all these different genres and perform them with such a high quality.
Mm-hmm. It's an incredible ensemble. Adam, you mentioned that you'll be starting your 15th season. Do you have one of the longer tenures? I'm just curious about how often the personnel of the ensemble changes and how stable it is from season to season, and how that affects musically how the ensemble kind of gels and comes together as people move in and out.
Right. Well, currently I'm tied with two others for this kind of tenure. I worked for many years with a man named Eric Alapori, who was our basso profundo, and he was in the ensemble for 28 years.
Wow.
So he actually retired, 2 years ago or so. So I worked with him a long time. And so who knows, whether I'll make it to 28 years, that's, we have yet to see that. But no, I believe he was one of the, if not the longest serving members of the ensemble. Currently, there's several other members who've been in a very long time, for 13 years and then 9 years. And so a lot of us have a long history
Right.
being in the group.
So it stays fairly stable.
yeah, it is important that, and there's always, well, I wouldn't say always. We're going on our third season with no turnover whatsoever. In the past, there had been, maybe one person a year or so might, come and go. There's, in my experience, there's never been, a huge swath of the ensemble
Mm-hmm.
that's left, and we had to rebuild in such a way. So yes, yes, like the sound may change a little bit over time, or one voice can really make a big difference. And but what I've seen is a very kind of a gradual shift in kind of how, and from my perspective, it's also about the group dynamic, how we get along on the road,
Mm-hmm.
or what are rehearsals like. um that, to me, that's what I sense the most,
Right.
not necessarily the sound, because we're always aiming for this, something quite specific on stage,
Right.
but it's sort of
So
like
that
behind the scenes that
personal
you
chemistry
realize.
plays a big role in it.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you're from Oklahoma, so I've got to ask you how a person from Tecumseh finds their way into such an elite ensemble. And I'm just curious about your upbringing, because you also mentioned that you were pursuing advanced degrees in horn performance. So you've got multiple talents there. I'm curious if there was somebody as a youth who was guiding you in your musical studies or really inspired you, or if that was part of your kind of family dynamic.
Oh, no, well, my family was supportive of me, but I'm by far the only musician
Mm-hmm.
in my family. Um, but I it wasn't until middle school or so, when band and choir were available, that I really found what I really love, and what I felt I was good at, and also at that time found, who actually I was going to be friends with, because growing up can be very confusing and awkward, and once I was in band and choir, that was kind of like my, my those were my
You
people.
found your tribe
And
at that point, yeah.
yeah, and also I was very fortunate at Tecumseh High School at the time, because we had an excellent band teacher and an excellent choir teacher. The band teacher was Susan Clothier, who then went on to Putnam City North, and then my choir teacher was Carolyn Darty, and they were both, so, I mean, more than just like the high school band and choir director. They really demanded they, that there be real music made,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, at the time, something for Tecumseh High School to be recognized sort of all over the whole state as this small school that had this really fine music program. And many of us were in the, all state sort of things. I was, and that was one goal of my, I was always, auditioning for these all district and all state things in Oklahoma. And I really wanted to, first chair in the all state band. That was like, nothing could be bigger than that, right? And so when I did that, when I landed first chair in the all state band in Oklahoma, I it just got me thinking, well, maybe that's not the biggest thing I can do. So when I was 17 years old, after my junior year of high school, I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, and studied at the Hart School.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year later, I started a degree at Manhattan School of Music. So it was a kind of a swift um, foray into this East Coast
Right.
music life. But it does, like we were speaking a little earlier, that what can I'm sitting here in my apartment in the middle of San Francisco, and you say, oh well, what can be more different than Tecumseh? But I mean, I can't forget that my teachers there in Tecumseh, it's because of them
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible, and we're very proud of you.
Thank you.
It's a great honor to be talking to you today. And we're looking forward to having Chanticleer perform here at the McKnight Center in our next season. Tim, I'm going to ask you a question. You in your self-introduction, are coming in as the music director. I'm just curious about your decision to make the transition from being a performer to being music director, and will you still perform occasionally? Is that something that you feel like you're going to miss, or do you think these guys are going to listen to you when you're music director? What is it about this new opportunity that is really intrigues you and really drives you?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the best answer is that the conducting, the music director idea was kind of what I wanted to do from the beginning. After college, I sort of went on this track to get a degree in choral conducting. I went to University of Michigan to get a
Mm-hmm.
master's in choral conducting before I went to Maryland, and I actually I sang, but I wasn't really a performer. And I sang tenor actually in college, and I wasn't very good at it. And so the performing part of it really wasn't an option for me for a while until I started singing in this falsetto, this countertenor range, and then realized that actually it was something that I could use. I could use the musicianship I had and this voice to actually perform. So I'm very thankful for that. It sort of led me to ensembles and experiences that I wouldn't otherwise have gotten the chance to do, like singing with Chanticleer for a year. So I'm very thankful that I have had the chance to perform and get those experiences. But actually, my desire from the beginning has always been to be a choral conductor, a music director. It's a lot more. I find it fascinating to look at a piece of music from every single perspective, and that's exactly what being a music director is all about. Is finding out not just each individual line, how they fit together, but also the historical background, the musical background, everything, all the different pieces to a puzzle that go into a piece of music. I'm really excited to be on that side of things.
Yeah, it seems like an incredible opportunity, and you're really, I mean, as you say, you're pursuing something that's been a lifelong goal of yours, which is very exciting. You both have talked about your education, your training. Adam, you talked about your inspiration as a young musician in the drive and encouragement that you got from family and from your band director and from your chorus director. And I know that in addition to hundreds of performances a year, Chanticleer is also very engaged in education. And wanted to ask if you could talk to us a little bit about the types of education activities that Chanticleer has and what you're able to do as you're traveling. I'm sure working with young singers along the way. If you could just share with us a little bit about that other side of the ensemble.
Yeah, well, so Adam, I'll talk a little bit about what we usually do on tour, and then maybe I'll let you talk about what you guys have been doing during the lockdown, during the quarantine.
Okay.
So Chanticleer education is a big part of what we do, and we are fortunate to get to work with ensembles across the country because we tour and perform across the country. So wherever we are, we try to find groups to work with, either high schools or colleges, where we can work with the ensembles at the institution nearby where we're performing, and give them not only a little taste of how we think about music and how we perform music and experience music, but also give them some tips or some pointers or some outside perspectives on what they're doing. Because I think it's really easy to sort of get lost in the weeds when you're a student. You don't necessarily see the outside perspective and how things can be fulfilled eventually. And I think it's really important to have an outside voice from somebody who's actually doing it day in and day out to give you the feedback that's really important. It also all of us, the 12 singers and myself, wouldn't be where we are today without excellent teachers and excellent feedback. And it's if we want to foster and train the next generation of excellent musicians and excellent singers, we need to take that responsibility upon ourselves and do that ourselves. And so we also do a lot of work in the Bay Area. We visit schools in the Bay Area more frequently than elsewhere in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and we even have a high school ensemble that is led through the Chanticleer organization, which is very exciting. Unfortunately, a lot of that has been put on hold the past couple months because of quarantine, but I know the guys have gotten up to some virtual teaching, and maybe Adam, if you want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, we worked with some groups. One I remember in Utah, and there were some other choirs in some other states somewhere. But obviously choirs can't be together right now, so it was mostly just question and answer, and maybe speaking of our upcoming performances at those institutions. We also Chanticleer also has what's called a lab choir, which is it's high school students, I believe up to 18 years old, from all over the Bay Area, who come in and work with our education director and members of the ensemble, and they'll put on performances throughout the year. And so one thing that we've done for those students is offer them voice lessons, just members of Chanticleer, and because they're in this program. And the my own experience, I have one student, and actually who doesn't want to have a voice lesson, but just wants to talk about music, and I think that's wonderful. And we share things back and forth, and what we've been into and what we've been listening to, and not so much about the technicalities of singing, but I think it's also a healthy thing to just kind of go into what makes us tick when it comes to music. And so that's been really fulfilling for me, and it was especially at a time before, when things are still very uncertain, but when things were like scary and uncertain, I think it was good to be able to have someone to talk to, and
right.
And so I felt that was a really symbiotic kind of activity.
Very much so. I have mentioned this before on other broadcasts, but for people who aren't musicians or who didn't perhaps train as a musician on a college level or in a more serious way, they often don't understand the profound relationship that musicians have with their teachers, and how that person really becomes this force in their life, and it often goes well beyond the development of their musical skills. They really often become a counselor to that person. And it sounds like you are all doing really incredible things to inspire the next generation of young musicians, which I think is very, very exciting. Adam, you mentioned, doing some online teaching, some Q&A with students, and so this kind of piggybacks on that, but I just wanted to ask briefly, because we're all seeing a lot of creative content out in the digital realm, during lockdown, and I know that Chanticleer has put out some great videos recently where you're all doing your part separately, and then somehow it comes together. It's magically edited, and I'm really curious about what this process is like. How does this work, that you're all performing independently, but somehow, in the digital realm, somebody's piecing all this together? Can you just tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure, I'll try. So first thing I believe we did was a piece actually arranged by Tim Keeler,
Yay.
called Distance.
Mm-hmm.
And Distance is a song by sort of a, I guess, like indie musician named Emily King. Is that right? Anyway, and we learned it several months back, actually for Tim's music director audition. And then this COVID thing happened, and we were basically forced to, whatever content we put out is going to have to be digital. And it just seemed really fitting that this song be something we do, because I mean it's called Distance, and
Right.
it's kind of, because being in quarantine and everything. So I have to give a big shout out to my colleague Andy Barry, who he's been sort of the brainchild for how these like the montages are orchestrated, how they're, the architecture of our, the Brady Bunch style
Right.
Zoom meeting kind of virtual choir aspect of that. And he's edited everything. And then Brian Hinman, who is on the sort of more audio front of things, and he's will record everything at home with and at first it was very, some of us have microphones at home, some don't. Some were just using their phones or singing into whatever they had, and Brian had to make everything gel together cohesively. I have no idea how he did it. Fortunately, I have a microphone at home because I do my own, singer-songwriter stuff at home for fun. But what both of them, what they were able to achieve is just, I don't know how they did it. But so, the rest of us were just given our assignments, measures whatever through this, you need to be looking this way and make sure you wave that, like, it was all so intricately mapped out.
Yeah.
And so I had, it was such a foreign thing to have to do that, to put on the can. There's like, 5,000 things that you need to worry about, is lighting. Where am I I'm going to have to make sure my head is here because I'm going to have people all around, like that, like, so just making sure, and I have to make sure that I'm looking fresh, and it's and that there's not like a big pile of laundry in the background. And so it was a much different experience, completely different experience than anything I've ever done.
They're very smartly done, and and some really fun. They're very fun, and some fun choreography, that's built into that. They're obviously they're telling a story through the video component, and I want to encourage people to check those out. Distance, in particular, I watched, and so great arrangement, Tim, with that. Very nice job, and apparently helped you land the music director gig, I guess. So. That's a nice bonus, but it's great that that's a piece that you brought to the group, and now it's been featured out on social channels. We have just a couple of minutes, and we've had some really great questions come in, and I want to take a look at these here because I want to be able to ask you some of these before we wrap up. This comes from Kennedy, who is, she worked a student worker in our box office, a vocalist, but she's asking about question about how do you balance the performance life with family and personal life?
Wow.
When you're on the road so much, that has to be very tricky.
Yes. I mean, there's things that, like, we're touring off and on half of the year. 6 months out of the year, we are on the road. And tours are, anywhere from, 10 days to 3 weeks. Actually, we were supposed to be in Australia right now for a 5-week tour of Australia. So I can't have a plant. I can't have a cat or a dog. And some of my colleagues have significant others. A few, I think maybe two, are married. But those relationships formed after they had been in the ensemble. And those relationships, are sort of, their partners understand the sacrifices they have to make with their time. So if one is to be in a marriage or a relationship, the other person, has to be willing to, accept that. And from what I understand, those that have worked out, they really actually it works for them. I guess the time
Right.
apart. But for me, it's it is a huge challenge to make have friends in San Francisco who aren't my colleagues, because once you start to develop a friendship or a relationship, and then it's like, okay, goodbye, I'll see you in 3 weeks, and that can really sort of that's difficult to when you want to make friends or have a significant other.
Can be very challenging. Tim, do you have anything you want to add to that question about work-life balance?
I mean, no, I think Adam covered most of it. It's fortunate that we get to do something that we enjoy doing, and we're not traveling the world doing something we hate. That would make it harder, I think. It
would.
So at least there's that.
I'm going to ask, I've got one more question here from Clint about, it's a question about repertoire choice and performance practice and how it may change with each generation of the group, or as personnel in the group change. And Adam, maybe this is a question for you. And we've talked a little bit about the personnel, and then it stays relatively stable, but have you seen the approach to music making change much, or repertoire changing based on the personnel of the ensemble?
Absolutely. Mostly those changes I've found come from whoever is the music director.
Mm-hmm.
Each music director will come with their own set of experiences and kind of their own idea of what they want to hear from the ensemble, and from their backgrounds they'll bring different things. For example, Louis Botto, he founded the group on to sing primarily early music. Mm-hmm. And then later on, Joseph Jennings, who was associated with Chanticleer for over 20 years and its music director. He's one of the foremost African-American musicians of our time. And, he brought to us all sorts of stuff, from his background with spirituals and gospel and jazz. Then the group started doing that in the 90s or so. And then, and then we've had sort of people come in who introduce pop music, or, and then our last music director had a long history with Robert Shaw and Alice
Mm-hmm.
Parker. And so it's not very cutting edge, but we did a lot of that stuff. Right. But, and so one of the reasons we're so incredibly excited about Tim is that there's going to be a whole breadth of stuff that I know that, he wants to explore with us, that is going to be really compelling for both the ensemble and the audience. Now, the group can sometimes we are sort of forced to do things, depending on the personnel of the ensemble, the singers, and what, like sometimes we may have for a few years a really freakishly high soprano that can just do anything up there. Okay, well then great, you can program for that.
Right.
or like Eric Alatorre had, you know, this bass voice that just would, there was no, he just could go lower and lower, and there was seemed to be no end to it. So you can program repertoire that is just, but you know, when these people come and go, you you have to adapt to what you have, and we want to hire the most capable musical singers that we can, that really gel with the rest of the group, not necessarily are, you know, what can you do a party trick like sing high or low.
Right.
So that's, so sometimes you just, you know, you may not have a soprano section that can sing as high as maybe you did 5 years ago, or you do, you know, so you really have to be mindful of how you're programming repertoire, because you know, you don't want to hear singers struggling on stage to do, you know, to do this or that,
Right.
because something was, you know, just because it's something we did 5 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's something we should be doing now.
Right. Tim, is there could you share with us in kind of closing if there's a particular artistic direction that you want to go with the ensemble at this point?
Well, you know, there's a lot out there, and what's thrilling about Chanticleer is its ability to do anything, despite its start as an early music group, which is, that's where I started too. So I've got a certain fondness for that. But really, the group can do anything, and that's what's so exciting about it. I'll say that for Chris's program this year, which is the first program that I've worked on, I'm really excited to bring some Armenian polyphony to the ensemble, which I think is going to suit the current group beautifully, and I'm really excited about that. And of course, you know, I've got a fondness for, as we already mentioned, the indie singer-songwriters like Emily King and other such things. So there's a lot of places to go, and I'm very excited about it.
That's wonderful. It certainly, I'm sure, adds to the very rich history of the ensemble to see this constant, you know, artistic evolution and evolution of repertoire. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Adam. We're grateful that you both were able to join us today. This has been a really fun conversation. Chanticleer performs at the McKnight Center in October of this year. Tickets are not on sale. Single tickets not on sale yet, but you can contact our box office if you'd like to get on our wait list to get in the queue to buy tickets. You can call us at 405-744-9999 or email us at info@mcknightcenter.org. And I hope our viewers online will join us next week, Wednesday, July 15th, again at 12 noon Central, for our next edition of Orange Plate Special. We'll be joined by Brandon Ridenour and Jeff Nelson, both members of Canadian Brass, and that will be a lot of fun as well. Thanks for being with us again today, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.